The heavy metal door of the gym swung shut with a loud thud, cutting off the noise from the busy street outside. Inside, the air smelled like old sweat, disinfectant, and damp cloth. It was a familiar smell for anyone who trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But for Alina, it felt like stepping back into a world she had left behind a long time ago. The air inside was thick and warm, almost heavy to breathe. The sound of bodies hitting the mats echoed off the walls. Mixed with the grunts of effort and the loud slap of bare feet gripping the floor, Alina stood near the entrance for a moment. She adjusted the strap of her gym bag on her shoulder. It was an old bag, faded from years of use, and it looked out of place among the flashy new gear scattered around the benches. She looked down at her own uniform. It was a simple white GI, the traditional uniform worn by grapplers. But it wasn't the fancy kind with lots of patches and bright colors that many of the younger students wore today. Hers was plain, slightly worn at the cuffs, and ironed flat. She looked like someone who didn't care about fashion, only about the work. She walked quietly toward the benches where the students were sitting. The room was buzzing with energy. Guys were wrapping their hands, tying their belts, and joking around. There were a few women there, too, mostly clustered together, stretching and talking. As Alina walked past, the noise didn't stop, but the feeling in the room shifted. It was subtle, like a breeze changing direction, but she felt it. Eyes turned toward her. They weren't hostile looks exactly, but they were curious and judgmental. In a gym full of athletes in their 20s, Alina clearly didn't fit the mold. She was older, her face showing lines of experience and stress, and her body was lean, but not bulky like the fitness enthusiasts around her. She found an empty spot on the wooden bench, sat down to take off her sneakers. Beside her, a group of 3 guys were talking loudly. One of them, a young man with broad shoulders and a blue belt tied around his waist, was laughing at a story his friend was telling. He noticed Alina sitting down. He stopped laughing for a split second, looked her up and down, and then turned back to his friend with a smirk. "Newbie," he whispered, but not quietly enough. "Bet she quits after the first warm-up," his friend chuckled. "Looks like she's lost. Maybe she's looking for the yoga class next door." Alina acted like she didn't hear them. She had heard whispers like that before. People looked at her and saw a tired woman, not a fighter. They saw someone who should be at home resting, not wrestling on the mats. She pulled her belt out of her bag. It was a white belt, stained slightly gray from years of washing. To the untrained eye, it signaled that she knew nothing. To her, it was just a piece of cloth. The knowledge was in her head and her muscles, not around her waist. She stood up and stepped onto the mats. The surface was firm, but had a little give, designed to protect the bodies when they fell. She bowed to the center of the room, a sign of respect for the training space, and then walked to the back of the line to join the class. The instructor, a black belt with a deep voice, clapped his hands together to start the session. "All right, everyone line up. Warm-up drills. Let's go." The class shuffled into lines, arranged by rank. All the white belts stood in the very last row. Alina took her place among them. The guys from the bench were standing in the row ahead of her, blue and purple belts, their backs turned to her. They were bouncing on the balls of their feet, shaking out their arms, looking full of energy. Alina stood still. She breathed in deeply through her nose, filling her lungs, and exhaled slowly. She let her shoulders relax. The warm-up began. It was a grueling series of movements designed to get the heart rate up, jogging in place. High knees, sprawling, and technical shuffles. Within 2 minutes, the room was heating up. The air grew hotter and heavier. The sound of 20 people panting and moving in unison filled the room. Alina moved with the group. She stood out because of how quiet she was. While the others grunted and groaned, complaining under their breath about the heat, Alina was silent. Her face didn't turn red like the beginners around her. She moved efficiently. She didn't waste any energy. When they dropped to the floor for breakfalls learning how to fall safely, she hit the ground with a loud thwack every single time. Perfectly in sync with the instructor's clap, the blue belt from the bench, whose name was Tai, glanced back over his shoulder while jogging in place. He saw Alina hitting the ground. He raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sound of her impact. It sounded heavy and experienced, but he quickly shook his head, dismissing the thought. He turned back to his friend and whispered, "She's trying too hard. Watch, she gas out in 10 minutes. As the warm-up ended, the instructor called for the students to find a partner for drilling. This was the awkward part for a new student. People usually paired up with their friends. Alina stood alone for a moment. She looked around, waiting to see who was left without a partner. Tai and his friend were paired together. Near them, a younger guy, with a fresh white belt, looked around nervously. He was skinny and looked scared. The instructor pointed at the skinny kid and then at Tai's group. "Break it up. Tai, you go with the new lady. Help her out with the technique." Tai sighed loudly, rolling his eyes for everyone to see. He didn't want to waste his time teaching a beginner. He wanted to train with his friends so they could work on their advanced moves. He walked over to Alina, wiping sweat from his forehead. He didn't smile. "All right," Tai said, his voice flat. "I'm Tai. We're doing arm bars today. You know what it is?" Alina looked him in the eyes. Her gaze was calm, unbothered by his attitude. "I know the technique," she said softly. Tai scoffed. "Right, okay, look. Just do what I do. Don't fight it. It's just drilling, okay? Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." He got down onto his knees, slapping the mat impatiently. Alina knelt in front of him. She was smaller than him, lighter. To Tai, she looked fragile. He felt a surge of arrogance. He was going to go easy on her, he decided. He would just let her practice the move without using any resistance. It was a nice gesture, in his mind, to treat a beginner like a child so she wouldn't get hurt. "Okay, lay down," Tai commanded, pointing to the mat. Alina lay flat on her back. Tai positioned himself over her inside her guard, her legs wrapped around his waist. He explained the move slowly, talking down to her as if she couldn't understand simple instructions. He placed his hand on her chest. "I push here. You grab my arm, okay?" Simple as they began the drill, Tai moved lazily. He left his arm out, making it easy for her to grab. He didn't use his weight to pressure her. He was looking around the room, watching other people roll. Barely paying attention to the woman beneath him, Alina grabbed his arm. She didn't pull it down fast, like a beginner who uses only arm strength. Instead, she controlled his wrist with a grip of iron. She lifted her hips off the mat, moving her whole body in one smooth motion to disrupt his balance. Taken by surprise, Tai stumbled forward. His hands slapped the mat to catch himself. He laughed nervously, his face flushing a little red. "Whoa, okay. You're stronger than you look. Good grip." He reset the position, but this time, a competitive spark lit up in his eyes. He didn't like being off balance, even by accident. He decided he wouldn't be quite so careless this time. But even then, he didn't see her as a threat. He just didn't want to look foolish in front of his friends. As the drilling continued, the gap between Tai's attitude and reality widened. He kept talking, explaining things she already knew, critiquing her posture when her posture was actually perfect. Alina stayed silent. She didn't correct him. She didn't brag. She just did the work. She hit the repetitions over and over, her body moving with a rhythm that confused him. She was fluid like water, while he was stiff and rigid. 5 minutes later, the instructor clapped his hands again. "Okay, good work. Now, specific training. Same partners. Start from the knees. Light resistance. Go," Tai smiled. This was the part he liked. Actual grappling. He knew he was going to tap her out quickly. He figured he would catch her in a choke, let her go, and they would move on. He wanted to impress the instructor with how fast he could submit the new student. They both dropped to their knees on the mats. Tai put his hands on her shoulders to grip her collar. He towered over her, confident and smiling. "Ready to have some fun?" he asked. Alina didn't smile back. She adjusted her grip on his sleeve, settling her weight low. Her eyes focused on a spot just below his neck, looking for the opening she knew would come. The class noise faded into the background. For her, the world had narrowed down to the points of contact between their bodies. She was no longer the outsider, the old woman, or the beginner. She was exactly where she belonged, The noise level in the gym rose as the instructor clapped his hands. The sound echoed off the brick walls, signaling the end of the polite drilling and the beginning of the specific training. This was the part of class where students stopped cooperating and started competing. It was the time when egos usually took over. Tai smiled as he dropped to his knees, his hands slapping onto Elena's shoulders. He felt a surge of excitement. In his mind, this wasn't a challenge. It was an opportunity. He was going to show the new woman how the game was really played. He wanted to look good for his friends and maybe impress the instructor with his dominance. Elena adjusted her position on the mat. She didn't look excited or nervous. She just looked calm. She sat back on her heels, her posture upright but relaxed, keeping her hands ready to defend. She didn't stare at Tai. She looked at the center of his chest, using her peripheral vision to watch his hips and shoulders. It was a habit she had developed over years of training, a way to read an opponent without giving away where she was looking. "All right, let's go," Tai said. His voice was loud, carrying to the groups next to them. He wanted an audience. He lunged forward, trying to wrap his arms around her waist and take her down to the mat. He didn't use technique. He just used his size and strength. He expected her to fall over instantly. Instead of fighting his push with her arms, Elena turned her body to the side. She let his momentum carry him past her. It was a simple move, like opening a door to let someone walk through. Tai stumbled forward, nearly losing his balance. He caught himself with one hand on the floor, letting out a huff of surprise. He scrambled back up to his knees, his face turning a little red. A few people nearby had stopped to watch. Tai laughed nervously to cover up his embarrassment. Okay, Tricky," he said. "I see you know a little judo." He didn't wait for her to reply. He came in again, but this time he was more careful. He grabbed onto the collar of her GI in her sleeve, wrestling with her to get a good grip. His hands were rough and heavy. He pulled her toward him, trying to off-balance her. Elena moved with him, keeping her base low. She felt his strength. He was definitely a strong young man, much stronger than her, but he was tense. Every muscle in his body was tight, ready to explode with energy, but that tension made him slow to react. They grappled on their knees for a minute, bumping shoulders and fighting for grips. Tai grew impatient. He didn't want to fight for hand control. He wanted to pin her. He suddenly stood up, breaking away from her, and then dove back in, trying to tackle her around the waist. Elena sprawled her legs out behind her, dropping her hips onto his shoulder. Her chest pressed down against his back, stopping his forward motion completely. She had his head trapped under her arm, and for a split second, she had him. She could have taken his back. She could have choked him. She felt him freeze. Then, with a burst of panic, Tai bridged his hips up hard, throwing his weight backward to shake her off. He was big enough that he could power out of mistakes. He flipped her over, and suddenly, they were rolling on the mats. Tai used his weight to land on top of her. He was in her guard, sitting between her legs, his chest pressing down on hers. "Gotcha," he said, panting heavily. He was sweating now, his hair matted to his forehead. He sat up straight, pushing down on her hips with his elbows. Tai loved this position. Being on top made him feel powerful. He looked down at Elena, who was flat on her back. She didn't look scared. She actually looked comfortable, which annoyed him. He wanted to see her struggle. He wanted to see that look of panic that beginners get when they can't breathe. "Let's see what you got now," Tai said loudly. He grabbed her lapels with both hands and pushed down, trying to crush her into the mat. He used his weight to make it hard for her to breathe. He wasn't really trying to pass her guard in a technical way. He was just trying to smash her. He postured up tall, thinking he was safe, but he made a critical mistake. In his effort to look dominant and talk to his friends, he straightened his arms completely. He left his elbows locked out and his neck low. Elena felt the shift. She didn't panic when he put his weight on her. She waited. She knew he was tired from his explosive movements. She knew he was relying entirely on muscle, not technique. While he was busy flexing and posing, she was busy calculating. She moved her hands subtly, gripping his sleeves in a blur of motion. Elena slipped one leg over his shoulder and locked her foot behind his knee. Before Tai realized what was happening, she had cut an angle. She wasn't lying straight on her back anymore. She had turned to the side. She pulled his arm with both of her hands, yanking him forward. Tai felt himself falling. His arms, which he had straightened out, had nothing to push against. He tried to scramble, to pull his arm back, but her grip was like a vice. He found himself spinning in the air. Alina swept him, using his own weight against him. 1 second he was on top crushing her, and the next second he was flat on his back. Looking up at the lights, the class went quiet for a moment as the thud of Tai hitting the mat echoed through the room. Alina didn't hesitate. As soon as he hit the floor, she moved to mount him. She sat on his chest, her knees pinning his arms to the ground. It was a perfect position, the most dominant spot in Jiu-Jitsu. Tai's eyes went wide. He wasn't smiling anymore. He felt trapped. He bucked his hips wildly, trying to throw her off, but she rode him like a surfer on a wave. She was too heavy, too centered. When he bucked, she just pressed down harder. Get off. Get off. Tai yelled, but he wasn't yelling in fear. He was yelling in anger. He was embarrassed. A girl who had just walked in off the street was beating him. He squeezed his eyes shut and bridged his hips again, thrusting upward with all his might. He managed to dislodge one of her legs. He scrambled to his knees, trying to turn away from her and turtle up. He was exposing his back, a huge mistake, but he just wanted to escape. Alina grabbed his waist. She tried to hook her heels into his thighs to take his back, but Tai was sweating so much that she couldn't keep the grip. He twisted violently, shoving her away with his hand. They separated, both scrambling to their knees and facing each other again. Tai was breathing hard, his chest heaving. His face was bright red. He wiped sweat from his eyes and looked at her with pure annoyance. The guys in the corner were laughing now. They weren't laughing at Alina. They were laughing at Tai. Tai didn't like that one bit. He stood up. He didn't want to grapple on the knees anymore. He stood up and beckoned her with his hands. Come on, he spat. Let's stand up. Stop hiding on the ground. Alina stood up slowly. She wiped a trickle of sweat from her own forehead. She wasn't tired yet, but she knew she had to be careful. Standing up with a bigger, stronger person who was angry was dangerous. If he decided to punch her or slam her, she could get hurt. Jiu-Jitsu was supposed to be about control, but ego made people do stupid things. They circled each other. Tai walked forward aggressively, cutting off the space. He wasn't keeping his hands up for defense. He was walking like he wanted to start a fist fight in a bar. He lunged in, trying to grab her around the neck to pull her into a guillotine choke. Alina ducked under his arm. She wrapped her arms around his waist and lifted, using a wrestling trip to sweep his leg. They crashed to the mat again, Tai landing hard on his side. This time, Tai was furious. He didn't care about technique anymore. He just started thrashing around, grabbing her arms, her GI, her pants. He was like a giant fish flopping around on a dock. It was ugly to watch. He wasn't thinking. He was just reacting. Alina stayed tight to him. She wrapped her arms and legs around him, controlling his frantic movement, like a parent holding a tantruming child. She waited for him to tire himself out. She knew he wouldn't last long at this pace. Calm down, she whispered close to his ear. Just breathe. I'm trying to choke you. Tai yelled back, struggling to free his head. You're too open, she said quietly. She waited for him to push against her chest. As soon as he extended his arms to shove her away, she slipped her arm under his chin. She locked her hands together. She had a rear naked choke, one of the deadliest moves in the sport. She didn't squeeze yet. She just held the position. She could feel his pulse beating rapidly against her forearm. Tai froze. He could feel the pressure building on his neck. He knew he was caught. He looked around, hoping the instructor wasn't watching. He didn't want to tap. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Alina tightened the squeeze slightly. It wasn't enough to put him to sleep, but it was enough to let him know she could end it whenever she wanted. She was in total control. Tai stopped moving. The anger drained out of him, replaced by the realization that he was helpless. He tapped his hand on her arm twice. Tap, tap. She let go instantly and rolled away from him, standing up to put distance between them. Tai lay on the mat for a second, staring at the ceiling. He rubbed his neck, his ego bruised more than his body. He sat up slowly. looking at Alina with a mix of confusion and resentment. She walked back to her starting line, not looking at him, not smiling, just breathing evenly. The instructor walked over to their pair. "Good energy, Ty, but relax a little bit. You're too stiff." "And you," he said, nodding at Alina. "Good defense. You stayed calm? That's the key." Ty nodded, looking down at the floor. He didn't say anything to Alina. He just went back to his bag and drank some water, avoiding the eyes of his friends. He told himself it was a fluke. He told himself he was just being nice, that he didn't want to hurt the old lady. But deep down, he knew she was better than him. And that was a hard thing to admit. The class moved into its final phase. The instructor clapped his hands and yelled, "Open mat. Fine partners. Go live, but stay safe." This was the time when everyone usually grabbed their closest friends or people of similar skill to spar. The noise level in the gym picked up again as the sound of shuffling feet and heavy breathing filled the room. Alina stood up and walked to the edge of the mat. She grabbed her towel and wiped the sweat from her face. Her heart was beating steadily, but she wasn't tired. She felt loose and warm, her muscles activated and ready for more. She looked around the room. Ty was in the corner, sitting on a bench and drinking water, deliberately looking away from her. He was still red in the face, pretending to fix his belt. Near the center of the mat, a small crowd had gathered. The instructor was talking to a man Alina hadn't seen before. This visitor was wearing a crisp black GI, with a red bar on his belt, signifying he was not just a black belt, but an experienced one, possibly a 3rd or 4th degree. He was leaner than the local instructor, with sharp eyes that scanned the room like a hawk. He looked like a predator walking through a zoo. The visitor stepped onto the mat too, roll with one of the academy's top brown belts. Everyone stopped to watch. It was a master class in movement. The brown belt, a big guy who usually smashed everyone, looked like a child against the black belt. Every time the brown belt tried to grab him, the visitor was gone. He was slippery, fast, and incredibly technical. Within a minute, he had caught the brown belt in an arm lock. The big guy tapped, shook the visitor's hand, and sat down. Looking humbled but happy to have learned something, next, the visitor rolled with a purple belt. The result was the same. The visitor moved calmly, never using unnecessary strength. He toyed with the purple belt, letting him escape once, just to catch him again in a different hold. Finally, he tapped him out with a smooth choke. The mood in the room was a mix of awe and intimidation. This visitor was clearly on a different level. The students whispered among themselves, impressed by his skill. Ty and his friends were watching closely, their eyes wide. The visitor stood up and looked around. He wiped his neck and looked at the local instructor. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice casual but loud enough for everyone to hear. The instructor looked around the room. The advanced students were tired or already beaten. The beginners were too scared to step up. Then, the instructor's eyes landed on Alina, who was standing quietly by the water cooler. "Alina," the instructor called out. "You up?" The room went silent. For a second, nobody moved. Then, the silence broke as people started to giggle and whisper. Ty snorted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Her," Ty whispered to his friend. "He's going to destroy her. She's a white belt. This is going to be painful." The visitor looked over at Alina. He didn't look annoyed or disappointed like the others. He looked curious. He walked over to her, his bare feet making no sound on the mat. He stopped a few feet away and bowed slightly. "Hi," he said. "I'm Robert, Alina," she replied, bowing back. "You look like you have good pressure," he said. It wasn't a joke. He was being serious. He had seen how she moved with Ty, even from a distance. He noticed she didn't scramble like a beginner. She moved with purpose. "Thank you," Alina said simply. "Ready?" Alina nodded. They met in the center of the mat. The circle of students widened to give them space. The air felt heavy. Everyone expected Robert to tap her out in 10 seconds. They thought he would just grab her arm or choke her, and that would be it. It felt unfair to some, but in Jiu-Jitsu, this was how you learned. You tested yourself against better opponents. They slapped hands, bumped fists, and began. Robert didn't rush. He moved forward slowly, trying to grip Elena's collar. Elena defended perfectly. She used her hands to block his arms, keeping her posture straight. She didn't pull away. She stood her ground. When he pushed, she pushed back. When he pulled, she stepped forward. They danced back and forth for a minute. Robert tried to trip her, but Elena maintained her balance effortlessly. He tried to pull her into his guard, but she stayed upright, controlling his sleeves. The whispers in the crowd died down. Some of the students frowned, confused. She wasn't falling for his tricks. She wasn't getting swept. She looked solid. Robert stepped up the pace. He grabbed her belt and the back of her collar, trying to throw her with a foot sweep. Elena sensed it coming. She hopped over his leg and twisted her body, breaking his grip. It was a beautiful, fluid motion. Suddenly, she was behind him. Robert smiled. He realized she wasn't a beginner. He had to stop treating her like one. They reset in the center of the mat. The atmosphere was different now. The mockery was gone. The students were leaning in, watching closely. Even Ty had stopped drinking his water and was staring at the mat. His brow furrowed. Robert engaged again, but this time he was more aggressive. He tried to wrap her up in a clinch. Elena fought for the inside position, her arms like steel bars. They wrestled for control, their forearms pressing against each other. Robert was stronger, but Elena used leverage. She dropped her hips and leveraged his weight against him. Throwing him off balance, Robert stumbled back and smiled again, a genuine, respectful smile. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's see what you got." He shot in for a double leg takedown, trying to grab her legs. Elena sprawled perfectly, dropping her hips onto his back and pushing his head down. She wrapped her arm around his neck, looking for a guillotine choke. The crowd gasped. Was she actually choking a black belt? Robert stayed calm. He patiently worked his defense, peeling her arm off his neck and standing back up. They separated again, breathing a little harder now. The respect between them was obvious. They were talking to each other quietly, small words of encouragement or warning. "Nice," Elena said. "Good grip," Robert replied. The round had been going on for 3 minutes, which was a long time for a black belt to roll with a beginner without finishing them. Robert knew he couldn't play around anymore. He needed to assert his dominance and show the technique he was known for. He decided to pass her guard. Elena pulled guard, sitting on the mat and wrapping her legs around Robert's waist. Robert stood up to try to break her open. He grabbed her ankles and pushed her knees apart, trying to step around her leg to pass. Elena stayed connected to him, using her arms to control his posture. She was like an octopus, constantly moving her hips and legs to keep him off balance. Robert finally saw an opening. He cleared one of her legs and moved to the side, pinning her shoulders to the mat. He was in side control, a dominant position. The students nodded, thinking the end was near. He was too heavy, too skilled. She was done, but Elena didn't panic. She took a deep breath and created a frame with her arm against his hip. She shrimped her body away, creating space. She tried to replace her guard, but Robert was too fast. He jumped over her legs, taking her back. He wrapped his legs around her waist and hooked his feet inside her thighs. He had the rear mount. This was the worst position to be in. The black belt was on her back, where he could easily choke her. The room held its breath. Robert reached his arm around her neck, looking for the rear naked choke. Elena tucked her chin, defending her neck with her hand. She stayed calm, focusing on her breathing. She knew if she panicked, she would tap. She waited for him to adjust his grip. When Robert shifted his weight to get a better angle, he made a tiny mistake. He leaned his head too far forward, exposing his own neck. It was a microscopic opening that a white belt would never see. A blue belt might be too slow to catch. But Elena wasn't a white belt. Her body moved before her brain even thought about it. She turned her head sharply to the side, trapping his arm against her neck. She wrapped her legs up high around his head and arm, locking her ankles together. It was a triangle choke. In one fluid motion, she had flipped the script. She had trapped the black belt. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Ty's mouth was hanging open. Robert pulled his head, trying to free it, but Alina squeezed her legs and pulled down on his head. It was tight. It was incredibly tight. Robert struggled for a moment, bridging his hips, trying to stack her up, but her balance was perfect. She controlled his posture completely. He realized he was caught. He stopped moving. He looked at the instructor and smiled, tapping her leg firmly. Alina let go instantly. She released the pressure immediately, unwrapping her legs and sitting up. She reached out and helped Robert to his feet. They bowed to each other and shook hands. Robert didn't look angry or embarrassed. He looked impressed, truly impressed. He put his hand on her shoulder and kept her there for a moment, talking to her quietly, while the rest of the room stared in total shock. "Good job," he said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Very good job." Lena just smiled a small, humble smile. She didn't pump her fist or celebrate. She just walked back to her bag, tied her belt, and sat down, leaving the entire gym wondering who she really was. The silence that followed the tap-out was heavy and absolute. It wasn't the polite quiet of people watching a match. It was the stunned silence of people witnessing something that defied their understanding of reality. Usually when a visiting black belt rolls with a white belt, it's a seminar. It's a chance for the black belt to show a few moves and let the beginner feel the difference in level. But this had been different. This was a contest, and the woman in the faded white GI had won. Robert, the black belt, stood up first. He reached down and pulled Alina to her feet, not roughly, but with a distinct sense of respect. He didn't brush off his GI or look annoyed. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder firmly and nodded. It was a nod that said, "I see you." In the world of Jiu-Jitsu, that was worth more than any medal. Alina accepted the gesture with a calm bow. She didn't jump around or celebrate. She didn't look at the crowd to see their reactions. She simply walked back to her spot on the bench, her breathing already returning to normal. She sat down, took a sip of water, and began to untie her belt as if she had just finished a light warm-up. On the other side of the mat, Ty felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He stood with his arms crossed, staring at her, trying to process what he had just seen. 5 minutes ago, he had told himself that his loss to her was a fluke, maybe due to him being tired or underestimating her. But Robert was a high-level black belt. He didn't get tired, and he didn't underestimate people. If Robert got caught, it was because Alina was dangerous. Ty looked at his friends. They were all staring at Alina with wide eyes, their whispers cutting through the air. "Did you see that?" One of them hissed. "She caught him in a triangle. I didn't even see it coming." Ty felt his face burn hot. He realized now that during their roll, she hadn't been fighting for her life. She had been controlling him, letting him exhaust himself while she waited for an opening. If she had wanted to, she probably could have tapped him out in 10 seconds. Just like the rumor said. The instructor clapped his hands, breaking the trance. "All right, everyone, line up. Bow out." The students scrambled into their lines, standing in order of rank. Alina, as a white belt, went to the far end of the room. Robert stood in the center, next to the head instructor. As the class bowed to the masters, Robert held his gaze on the line of students. But he specifically looked toward the end of the line where Alina stood. He gave her a small, knowing smile, before turning to shake hands with the instructor. The class was dismissed. The usual noise of bags zipping and people chatting slowly returned, but the energy was different. As people walked toward the changing rooms, they gave Alina a wide berth. No one was laughing now. No one was whispering about yoga classes. They were looking at her with curiosity and a healthy dose of fear. Alina took her time packing her bag. She wiped down her belt and folded it neatly. She was used to this kind of attention, though she didn't enjoy it. She trained because she loved the art, not to intimidate people. She knew that once the shock wore off, the questions would start. She just wanted to get changed and leave, before the drama began. She slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the door. She was almost to the exit when a voice stopped her. "Hey." She turned around. It was Ty. He was standing a few feet away, holding his own gym bag. He looked nervous. His arrogance from earlier had completely evaporated. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking at the floor, then back at her. "Gotchas." I wanted to say, Tai started, scratching the back of his neck. That was impressive, really. Alina looked at him. Her expression was neutral, not angry, but not particularly welcoming either. She remembered how he had mocked her, how he had tried to crush her just to feed his own ego. She didn't have patience for insincerity. Thank you, she said simply. She turned to leave. Wait, Tai said, stepping closer. I mean it. I've been training for 3 years, and I've never seen anyone move like that. Where did you train before? Do you compete? Alina paused. She looked at Tai, really looked at him, and saw a young man who was confused and trying to understand something bigger than himself. She decided to give him a crumb of truth, not to brag, but to teach him a lesson about assumptions. I trained a long time ago, she said. In a different country? A different country? Where? It doesn't matter, Alina said. And I don't compete anymore. I train for life now, not for trophies. Tai frowned, trying to make sense of that. But you're a white belt. How can you be that good if you're a white belt? Are you a sandbagger or something? The term sandbagger was used for people who pretended to be a lower rank just to win medals in easier divisions. Alina let out a small, dry laugh. A sandbagger? No. When I moved here, I sold my old GIs. I didn't bring my belts. Today was the first day I could afford to buy a new one. I came in with a white belt because that is what I could afford. Tai stood there, his mouth slightly open. He hadn't thought of that. He had spent hundreds of dollars on his GIS, his patches, his fancy gear. He assumed everyone else did too. It hadn't occurred to him that the worn-out gear meant something else entirely. So you're not a white belt, Tai said, more as a realization than a question. Today I was, Alina said. That is the only belt that matters. Before Tai could ask anything else, Robert, the visiting black belt, walked over. He had changed into his street clothes and was carrying his duffel bag. He smiled when he saw them talking. I hope this young man wasn't bothering you, Robert said to Alina. No, Alina said. He was just being polite. Robot looked at Tai and raised an eyebrow. Tai swallowed hard. He felt like a little kid being scolded by the principal. She submitted you, didn't she? Robert asked Tai directly. Tai looked down. Yeah, she did. And did you learn something from that? Yes, sir, Tai said quickly. I learned that I need to stop assuming things based on looks. Robert nodded. Good. Because Jiu-Jitsu is about what you can do, not what you look like. This lady, he gestured toward Alina, has skills that many black belts would envy. Her timing is perfect. She doesn't waste energy. You should be thankful you got a roll with her. I am, Tai said, and for the first time, he actually meant it. Robert turned back to Alina. I would love to pick your brain about your training history sometime. I have a feeling you have some interesting stories. Alina smiled, a genuine smile this time. Perhaps another time, Robert? I have to get home. I understand, Robert said. But please, don't wait so long to come back to the mats. The mats need people like you. People who treat the art with respect. I'll think about it, Alina said. She nodded to both of them, pushed the heavy metal door open, and walked out into the cool evening air. The sound of the busy street greeted her, cars honking and people rushing home from work. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. Inside the gym, the conversation was exploding. Everyone was talking about the mystery woman. They were debating her rank, guessing her background, and recounting the details of her match with Robert. It would be the main topic of conversation for weeks. They would probably make up wild stories about her being a secret agent or a former champion, but Alina didn't care about the legends they would spin. She walked to the bus stop, her muscles pleasantly tired. For the first time in years, she felt like she was truly herself again. She had stepped back into the fire, and she hadn't burned. She had held her ground. She had shown the younger generation that strength isn't just about muscles and aggression. It's about control, patience, and knowing who you are. As she waited for the bus, she touched the white belt around her waist. It was just a piece of cloth, but it represented a fresh start. She realized Robert was right. She couldn't stay away forever. She belonged on the mats. The challenge wasn't to prove she was better than them. The challenge was to help them become better. Just like her old teachers had helped her, the bus pulled up, its doors hissing open. Alina stepped on, paid her fare, and took a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the gym one last time. The lights were still on, casting a glow onto the sidewalk. Inside, the next generation of fighters was training, learning, struggling. And maybe, just maybe, she would be there to guide them. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. The ride home was long, but for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The warrior had awakened, and she was ready to return. The bus ride home felt different that evening. Usually, Elena would stare out the window at the passing city lights, her mind occupied with grocery lists, bills, or the fatigue from her cleaning job. But tonight, her body felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Her muscles hummed with a dull ache, the kind of ache that comes from good hard work. She looked at her reflection in the dark window and saw a ghost of her younger self staring back. The woman looking back wasn't just tired. She was capable. She got off at her stop and walked the 3 blocks to her small apartment. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people kept to themselves. When she walked into her living room, the silence was welcoming. She dropped her gym bag on the floor and sat heavily on her sofa. For a long time, she just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She replayed the matches in her head ties arrogance, the class's laughter, and then the silence that fell when she caught Robert. It felt surreal. Like a scene from a movie she had watched a long time ago, Alina stood up and walked to the small hallway closet. It was cluttered with old coats and boxes of paperwork. She pushed the hangers aside and reached to the very back of the top shelf, where she kept a small, dusty shoebox. She pulled it down and carried it to the kitchen table. She sat down and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a piece of soft velvet, were 2 belts. One was a black belt, worn thin and frayed at the ends. The other was a faded red and black belt, the mark of a master. There were also a few small medals and a folded photograph. She unfolded the photo. It showed a younger Elena, standing in the center of a podium, her arms raised in victory. She was wearing the red and black belt. Behind her, a banner hung with the name of a gym in a country she hadn't visited in 20 years. She ran her thumb over the photo. She remembered the feeling of that day, the roar of the crowd, the adrenaline, the sense of being at the top of the mountain. But then her memory shifted to the hard years that followed. Injuries that didn't heal right. The move to a new country where she didn't speak the language well. The struggle to find a job, to pay rent, to survive. Slowly, the training stopped. The belts were put away. The warrior went to sleep so the survivor could take over. Alina looked at the white belt she still wore around her waist. It felt strange to wear it when she had achieved so much in the past, yet it also felt right. She realized that by wearing the white belt today, she had stripped away her ego. She had walked onto the mats with nothing to prove and everything to learn. And in doing so, she had learned more about herself than she had in years. She folded the photo and placed it back in the box. She didn't put the old belts back on. She wasn't that person anymore. She was different now. She was older, wiser, and perhaps a bit slower. But she had a depth of understanding that she lacked when she was young and hungry for trophies. She closed the box and pushed it to the back of the closet. She didn't need to look at them to know who she was. The next few days passed quietly. Alina went to work, cleaned offices, and bought groceries. But every time she walked past the gym, she felt a pull. On Thursday, she didn't just walk past. She stopped at the door. She could hear the thumping of bodies inside, and the instructor's voice calling out instructions. She opened the door. The class was already in session. The instructor looked up and saw her. A big smile spread across his face. Alina, welcome back. All heads turned. The students stopped what they were doing. Ty was there, standing in the middle of the mat. When he saw her, he straightened up immediately. He didn't smirk or look away. He bowed his head slightly in respect. Alina walked in, wearing the same plain white GI. She felt the eyes on her, but this time, there was no judgment. There was only anticipation. She put her bag down and stepped onto the mat to bow. "Grab a partner," the instructor called out. Before anyone else could move, Tai walked over to her. He looked nervous but determined. "Do you want to drill?" Tai asked. His voice was polite, stripped of the arrogance from the first day. "Sure," Alina said. They dropped to their knees. Tai didn't try to overpower her this time. He didn't act like he knew everything. He listened. "I'm having trouble with this sweep," Tai admitted. "Can you show me how you shifted your weight on Monday?" Alina nodded. She placed her hands on his shoulder and hip. "Here," she said softly. "Don't push with your arms. Use your hip. Drop it down like you were sitting in a chair." She guided him through the movement. Slowly, Tai began to understand. He felt the leverage. He felt how little effort it took when the technique was right. "Like that?" he asked. "Exactly," she smiled. For the rest of the class, they worked together. Tai wasn't the only one who approached her. Other students came by asking for advice, wanting to feel the grips she used, wanting to learn the secrets of her smooth movement. Alina didn't hold back. She became a teacher. She corrected their posture, explained the mechanics of leverage, and shared the wisdom she had stored up for decades. When the class ended and the students lined up to bow out, the instructor made an announcement. "Everyone," he said, his voice commanding attention. "As you know, belts are earned here. You don't buy them, and you don't get them for showing up. You get them for skill, character, and time." The room went silent. Tai looked over at Alina, wondering what was happening. "Alina came to us as a white belt," the instructor continued, "and she showed the humility of a white belt. But today, she has shown us the knowledge of a master. It is rare to see someone with such control and respect, to honor her past and her skill, and to ensure she can share that knowledge with all of you. I am promoting her immediately." He walked over to Alina. He unhooked a brown belt from his waist belt, signifying a high level of expertise. "Just one step away from black," Alina, he said, holding the belt out. "You don't need a new belt to tell you who you are. But we need this belt to know who you are." Alina felt a lump in her throat. She looked at the brown belt, then at the students. She saw Tai smiling. She saw the respect in their eyes. She realized she wasn't an outsider anymore. She was part of the team. She bowed her head and let the instructor tie the belt around her waist. It felt heavy, solid, and right. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. The class erupted in applause. They clapped their hands and stomped their feet against the mats. It wasn't the mocking laughter of a few days ago. It was the sound of a community welcoming a hero they didn't know they had. Alina walked out of the gym that night into the cool air. The streetlights flickered on. She touched the brown belt wrapped around her waist. She knew she wasn't going to become a world champion again. She wasn't going to fight in the big tournaments. But she had found something better. She had found her home. She walked down the street, her steps light. The warrior had awakened, but this time she wasn't fighting for glory. She was fighting to keep the art alive, to teach the next generation that strength isn't about how loud you yell or how hard you push. It's about how you treat others and how you carry yourself. And as she disappeared into the city night, the lights of the gym stayed on, a beacon for anyone who walked through those doors looking for a challenge, looking for respect, or just looking for a place to belong.